how do you kind of build it up as a process in terms of sort of layering in both research, ideas, story, and then I guess sort of where it finally ends up?
For me, I do all of the research first. It takes about, gosh, probably like 10 months worth of research. And like, for example, with my book that I just wrote about Warsaw, I had over 100 nonfiction books that I read, many of which were out of print. With that particular one, you also have to worry about, like, because it was occupied by Russia for so long, or the Soviet Union, you have to worry about censorship. So if it was prior to a certain date and it was published in Poland, I couldn't use it. I had to go with something that was published like in England, for example, so that it wasn't going to be censored. So even having to think about those little things that really come into play with doing research. But I filled up about 15 spiral bound notebooks with research notes, including a 2-week trip to Warsaw. And so once I have all of that together, that's when I really go through and I figure out what key pivotal points in history I want to have my character experience. And then from there, really after I do my research is when I build my character, and the plot is really dictated by historical fact and really how my character is reacting to those events that happen and what direction it leads them in.
I think the first time I heard you talk about this, because we've spoken a little bit before about your research process, I was really stunned by the volume of initial research that you do, those 100 nonfiction books that you talked about. When you start ordering those books and reading those books and kind of start getting a grasp on a topic, how much of an idea of the story do you have already? Do you have characters in place? Do you know, ultimately, I want to write a book about X? Or is it really just immerse yourself in this world, immerse yourself in this time period and see what you come up with?
Usually I have a spark of an idea of really where I want to go with it. And from there, I kind of have an idea of the character that I want to have. But the research really is so important with coming up with the actual like foundational details of the character. I do a lot of research, not only on World War II time period, but also what happened in their country beforehand, with government, economics, that kind of thing, just because like I know here in America, everything that I've learned in school about America has helped to create me as the American woman that I am today. And that's going to transcend all time periods. So I know that somebody in World War II, in Poland or in England or Portugal would be exactly the same way as well. And so, and it really is so important to grasp the mood of the country and really the culture. And one of the prime examples that I usually give for that is like, in the last bookshop in London, when Buckingham Palace was bombed during World War II. And I know here in America, if the White House was bombed, Americans would be all up in arms. We want retaliation immediately. Let's go to war. I mean, they were already at war, but let's go get them. And when Buckingham Palace was bombed, the Queen said, well, now I can look the East End in the face. As you guys know, the East End got it the worst in the beginning of the Blitz. And people in England were like, the King and Queen are being bombed. They're just like us. And so really the Blitz, which with the whole intention of that was to really destroy the morale of the British people, it did exactly the opposite and really brought them together. And that's such a prime example of how the mood of the culture can really be so different. And it's that sort of foundational detail that is really necessary for building a believable character for that time period and that location.
Yeah, speaking about the location, I actually used to live on Britain Street, which is where you couch the character, where the main character in the last bookshop in London lives, doesn't she? Grace, is that her name?
Yes. And in full disclosure, I wrote that during the pandemic, so I didn't get to actually go there and visit. That's like one of the few books I've done that I haven't been able to go visit.
Well, this is what I thought was so amazing. Julia and I were talking about this, just saying what an amazing sort of job you've done in terms of bringing London to life. Given that we knew, I think we'd done some back reading or something, we knew that you hadn't actually been there during that time. And I wonder whether you now had a chance to come to London and kind of infill the world that you'd created and then kind of place your story within that world.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And actually, I will be going to London in March, and I'm very much looking forward to it. That's what Julia and I were actually chatting about earlier.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, you must revisit Britain Street, because having lived there, I can tell you that there's a pub there called the Jerusalem Tavern, and it's one of about probably 20 pubs in London that claims to be the oldest pub in London. So you must
Oh, that's cool. I'll
have
have
a
to
little
check
trip
that out.
down there. It's very atmospheric, but no, it's an amazing job you've done. And also, I have to say, as an American, writing about what seems to be a very English experience, at least in that book, you do an amazing job of just coming across as an English person. And also that your narrator, I'm listening to it on audiobook, Saskia Marlaveld,
yeah.
I discovered she's American as well. So between you, you've absolutely nailed this sort of crossover into appearing as English people.
Oh, thank you so much. I knew that Saskia would do a great job, but I confess I am so glad that because when you said you were reading my book, I was like, oh gosh, not going to be intimidated because you're English and I am an American writing English characters. So hearing you say that honestly is like, thank you.
Yeah.
It's a little intimidating. I'm not going to lie.
Speaking about some of that on the ground research in detail, at what point do you make the decision that you have enough background reading to know what you're looking for when you make those trips?
It's really dictated by deadline, because, we have a certain time we have to turn our books in by, and I really want to do the on the ground research before starting to write the book. And then you have to think about realistically, how much time am I going to have to write this book? I confess the research aspect of it, I love it so much. I really think that I probably would never, ever write a book if I didn't have a deadline. So it's honestly a very good thing that I'm limited because I probably would spend like 10 years. I'd probably move there for like 3 months or something and be like, Madeline, you can ever turn in this book? Like, well, you didn't give me a deadline.
How do you actually go about the process of the drafting then? Is that different from the research? So once you kind of think, right, I'm going to go now, what happens in your world as a writer?
So I usually want to have a lot of research done before I go. I've been very fortunate to find some really incredible private tour guides who have been able to really modify an entire schedule based on what it is that I need in my research. And by the time I reach out to the tour guides, I usually have an extensive amount of knowledge. In fact, I've had some before that are like, wow, I think you actually know more about my history during World War II than I do of my country. You should probably go to somebody else. And then I have other people who are enthusiasts and are like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I have exactly where I want to take you and what I want to do. And that's been hugely helpful for making sure that I have, that I get the depth of knowledge that I need when I go. Because as much as it's like, oh, it's so cool to get to go to Warsaw and eat the food. I work from like, as soon as I wake up in the morning, and I usually go way past my bedtime usually, because of just wanting to get as much as I possibly can in. And then, I have an idea of the plot before I go. I have like a pretty, like kind of like a skeletal outline before I go. And then going there, it's almost like getting to travel and getting to experience the location, the food, just like the culture, like the immersion of all of it. And I also try to learn the language when I go as well. Not fluently. There's no time for that, unfortunately, but I try to at least be able to get enough that I can communicate a little bit. And so it's almost like a black and white coloring book, and then going to go travel and go there is what fills it in with all those vibrant colors and experiences. And so when I come back, I get to really flesh out that entire that plot. And once that plot is totally and completely fleshed out, that's when I start writing. And I can usually draft the book in about anywhere from 1 to 3 months, depending on my deadline.
That's astonishingly fast, it seems to me.
Thank you. I will say that my experience with, just because I have written, I think I'm at 35 books right now that I've written. And so, the writing process for me, it has gotten, faster as I've gone. Like, I think my first romance novel that I had written previously, or my very first one, I think took like a year. And now I can write like a 75,000 word historical romance in about 3 weeks. It's not a pleasant 3 weeks, but it is definitely like, kids are on their own for dinner. Nobody talked to me. I haven't brushed my teeth and it's 3:00 in the afternoon, kind of 3 weeks, but it's still 3 weeks.
So it's a pretty all-consuming process, it sounds like. When you kind of put all these pieces together, and I think every writer has their own perspective on their writing process, love it or hate it, are there some challenges to the way that you approach writing historical fiction that you would prefer to change, but you're sort of, this is the process and you're stuck with? Or do you like this method of kind of large scale research on the ground and then fill in the plot and begin that drafting process?
Honestly, I really do love the process that I do. I'm very fortunate in that regard. I think that, like, I guess it would be easier for myself if I could do less research, but I can't let myself do it because I'm incredibly type A. And in my mind, I'm like, but this happened in history. I don't want to change that. This is going to have to accommodate this thing that happened in history. So, I definitely think I make things harder on myself with the amount of research that I do, but I also love it. So I'm like, sorry, not sorry.
Having swapped over from historical romance to historical fiction, like what brought about that that shift? Was it just sort of interest or other pressures?
Going to historical fiction is something that I've been wanting to do for a while. And especially when I was writing historical romance, like initially I started writing in the 1700s, and then I realized, oh, you know what? I think I want to write medieval. So then I switched to medieval, and I did about a year's worth of research before I started writing medieval. And then I thought, oh, what about Regency? So then I did like a year's worth of research, and then I started writing Regency. And so when I did World War II, when I did the last bookshop in London, once I really got into the research of it, I realized, oh, I love the research. I mean, I love writing the books as well, but that's why I kept jumping around, I think, so much in the historical genre in romance, is because the research aspect of it is really just so incredibly appealing to me. I love learning about how people lived. I like to learn all the everyday details. For me, are more fascinating. Like what they ate, what they wore, how they worked around this, what normal people did, how ordinary people became extraordinary with the efforts that they were able to put forth during such difficult times. It's just fascinating to me. And so once I did that, I realized, I think I really found my niche.
Well, there's an incredible wealth of stories and detail and different things that you can bring to a World War II novel. And I think as an author, it's such a great well to go back to over and over again. But I'm curious about when you were researching World War II, and you were researching medieval, and you were researching Regency, and sort of all these different time periods that you've done. Are there some commonalities between your approach to researching those? I mean, I imagine that your sources must change and kind of what you have access to. But are there certain things that you're always looking for?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just like I really do like to find out everyday details, which can be difficult, especially as the time period goes deeper. Like, for example, medieval, it was all the wealthy people who were writing down their day to day. So finding out information about, just average people is a lot more difficult. Unfortunately, same thing sometimes with Regency, because it was really all the rich people who were like, oh, my life is so important. And so you don't always have as much of that day to day. One of the things that was really amazing for me with doing World War II research is the access to media files, being able to hear things, being able to watch videos. I actually always keep a magnifying glass next to, cat hair just flew up. That was embarrassing. But she likes to hang out behind my computer because it's warm. But I always like to have a magnifying glass next to my computer, because I can look at actual pictures of the street, and I can use my magnifying glass, and I can see the names of all of the businesses. I can see advertisements that are in the window. But as far as the actual process of delving into the time period, I mean, one of the biggest sources that I always go to, and I think this happens with a lot of historical fiction authors, is that bibliography. It is gold. And it's so funny because I remember being a little girl in school and there's like, and there's the bibliography. And I'm like, boring. Who'd want all that stuff? And now as an adult, I'm like, ooh, the bibliography. And, the bibliography really just opens the door to so many gems that you would never even think to look for, because some of these titles are very incongruous with what it is that you're actually looking for. But it could be one chapter that gives you this most amazing detail that you never would have found if you hadn't gotten that book. And unfortunately, a lot of them are out of print. So I always tell my family if I meet an untimely demise, they have to make sure that my library gets donated to like a university or something, because I feel like so many of these books are so out of print. I don't want them to just disappear,
I know sometimes I feel like we're kind of like magpies, just sort of sifting through the detritus of the past, and we're like, oh, that's a nice shiny fact, or that's a little detail that I can sort of take and steal and appropriate and put it in my story.
Thanks for watching this clip from the History Quill podcast, all about writing and publishing historical fiction. If you want to find out more about the topics discussed, check the description for a link to the full episode and the episode page on our website, where you can access a range of relevant resources. You can also join our email list to receive new podcast episodes and more content for historical fiction writers. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and switch on notifications.